Remembering Connecticut, Ancient Indian Settlements. Over this past year, we've celebrated the 350th anniversary of English settlement in our state. Yet, the history of the Indians, the people who gave us the name Connecticut, stretches back more than 10,000 years. What we know about the early people of Connecticut comes from the work of archaeologists who try to reconstruct the fabric of Indian life from the physical evidence left behind, such as campsites, weapons, tools, and other artifacts. Archaeologist Kevin McBride explains.
Generally, the procedure is just to dig a few holes with a shovel and a screen within a grid of some kind. Initially, you wouldn't invest too much time in laying out a grid with a transit, say. You're just in there, quick and dirty, to try and make some inferences about what's below the ground. You can't see below the ground, so really the only option you have is to dig some holes. For an archaeologist, what we see in the ground, the association with other artifacts, where it's occurring, how it's related to other things can help tell us some things too. So for example, if we find a large fireplace and we find in it a lot of crushed bone, deer bone, and next to the fireplace we find a rounded stone that has a lot of pit markings on it, it's probably a reasonable assumption or inference that that was a hammer used to crush the bone. So things like that, context and association, help us quite a bit too. There's a number of different ways for us to make our judgments. You can never be sure, of course, but your inferences can be supported.
Much remains to be discovered, and archaeologists do not always agree on the meaning of existing data. Nevertheless, a generally accepted outline of Indian history has emerged. The first inhabitants of our state were most likely migrant hunters who followed herds of bison and caribou into Connecticut more than 10,000 years ago, at the end of the Pleistocene, the most recent Great Ice Age. Referred to as Paleo-Indians, these people lived for short periods of time in small camps and then moved on. They depended on animals for meat and clothing and made scrapers, projectile points, and other tools made from stone. They supplemented their hunting with fish and wild plants gathered in the early forests which had begun to emerge from the glacial tundra. As the ice receded and hardwood forests developed, the number and types of animals and plants began to increase. This bounty allowed the Indian population to expand, and although they continued to move around, they returned to larger, more permanent campsites on a seasonal basis. Food sources were more diverse, and so were the tools used to exploit them. In addition to various weapon points, people made axes for felling trees, gouges for carving dugout canoes, and hooks, nets, spears, and traps for catching fish. For cooking, they made bowls and pots out of soapstone. Towards the end of the Archaic period, about 3,000 years ago, Indian graves show ceremonial burials with various possessions alongside the deceased, including artifacts made from materials which are not indigenous to Connecticut. This suggests that a trade network had begun to be established, reaching as far as the Midwest. The hunting, fishing, and food-gathering economy continued into the woodland period, reaching the time of European contact. Two new developments now affected Indian life. Pottery making appeared in southern New England, improving food storage and cooking. Broken remains of this pottery provide important clues to archaeologists in the dating of Indian campsites. The other big change, coming just a few hundred years before English settlement, was the development of agriculture. The Indians learned to supplement what they gathered in the woods by domesticating corn, beans, and squash.